Well, thank you all for coming. I've really been looking forward to this. I got back in mid-August from about 20 months of dissertation fieldwork and survey research in India. So I've been spending the last couple months going through my survey data, going through my ethnographic field notes, and kind of putting together a theoretical story. And in my dissertation, I'm trying to understand the origins of political order, political organization, and development in slum communities, particularly in northern India. So I'm really looking forward to your questions and feedback. Just to give you a sense of where I'm going in my presentation, my dissertation revolves around two what I consider to be intimately related questions of organization and development. So I'd first like to begin the presentation with motivating my dissertation. I'll then get into the context of slums in India and define the population that I'm actually studying, because the urban poor live in a variety of informal urban settlements, and I'd like to be as specific as possible about the kind that I'm studying. Next, I'll get into my theoretical framework, how I think I can answer my research questions, the data that I gathered over those 20 months, and I would like to present my research findings, and then briefly get into how I think I'm contributing to the bodies of literature that I'm speaking to. So the first question that my dissertation addresses is a developmental one. So in the summer of 2009, I was a researcher at the National Institute of Urban Affairs in New Delhi. And there's a project going on in India right now, JNNURM, this kind of unprecedented urban development program. And we were getting all this survey data back, and every time we got this data from a different city, it was amazing to see the incredible variation in levels of development across slum communities. Regardless of how old the slum is or where it's located in the city. Some slums getting drinking water, sanitation, waste removal, street lighting, paved roads, respondents of survey, respondents where that public safety was very high, medical facilities and schools. So the first question that I'm really trying to answer in my dissertation is, what causes these developmental disparities? Why is it that in all these cities in India, when you look across these hundreds of slums within each city, some are being provided high levels of infrastructural development and public services, while others are continuing to be in the same squalor that they've been for decades, and others are in between. And it really, the contrast really is this stark, that you'll walk into one community, these are actually about 30 to 35 years old, both of them. You'll walk in, the roads will be paved, there seems to be electricity, still a slum settlement, but you can kind of see the differences. What's causing this? To give you some descriptive statistics of what I'm talking about, as I'll describe in my data section, my survey involved 80 distinct slum communities in the cities of Jaipur and Bhopal in North India. So just to give you some quick descriptive statistics of this variation that I'm talking about in development. So concerning paved roads, sewer lines, streetlights, household access to piped water, provision of municipal waste services, and provision of government medical camps. This is the average access that the slums in my sample have, with a high degree of variation. So some of the communities have absolutely none of these things, some of them have all of them, and many are kind of in between. So this is what I'm trying to explain. The second question that motivates my dissertation is an organizational one. So once I started getting curious about all these differences in development, I started going into the slum communities, first in New Delhi and then on pre-dissertation trips to Jaipur, Indore, and Bhopal. And what I found was when you walk into a slum settlement, they're each like their own distinct social world. That you'll go in and you'll ask, is basti mein aapka neta kahan rehta hai? Where does your leader live? You sit down with the leader and you get a sense that each of these communities are organized in very unique and distinct ways. So what are some of the things that I would encounter? Caste and religious councils, so each caste kind of having its own jati panchayat. Community development councils, so these are councils that would spread across different caste and religious groups. And there'd be a president of the community. Gangs, political party networks, and in a few of the communities, but very few of them, a complete absence of authority and hierarchy. They're not having any leaders. So the second question that motivates my dissertation is, despite these shared conditions of informality and illegality, slums exhibit incredible variation in the extent to which residents are organized to mitigate pervasive risks, things like eviction, and demand development from the state, so the municipality and the state governments. So why do some of these communities develop these institutions inside the community that advance the collective interests and security of residents while others are failing? Why are some able to organize themselves to bargain with politicians and the municipalities to get development and others are failing? So One of the answers that I think I have to this question is that I think I've found a least common denominator of organizations across all these communities. So as I said, they're very, it's like going in a unique social world in each one of them, but there's a least common denominator, and that is political party networks. So those of you who are familiar with some of the political parties in India, like the BJP, the Congress, the BSP. Some slums in India, when you walk in, they're completely flush with political party workers. So when you meet these leaders, you literally go to their house and you sit down with them. Outside the house, there'll be the lotus flower for the BJP or the hand of the Congress Party. They'll have a distinct position in the political party that connects them to other political party workers in the community, but also up to the highest echelons of party organization in the city. Other slums that you go in are home to only a few workers, while others are completely absent of party workers altogether. So this secondary question that I need to answer in my dissertation is, why have some parties exerted great effort to extend their networks, their party organizational networks, into some slums while completely dismissing others? And what I'll argue to you is the spread of these networks and their unevenness across slums in a city very powerfully affect the ability of these communities to get development for themselves, to claim development from the state. Just to give you a quick sense of what these party hierarchies look like. So at least in northern India, this is the example of the Congress Party. You'll have your rank and file Congress worker, of which there's over 100,000 in Jaipur. Then you move up to the booth level. So there's about 1,500 booths in Jaipur. Each will have its own adhyaksh, or president. Then you go up to the ward level. There's 77 wards in Jaipur. Then up to the block level, and then up to the district level. And above that is the state and even the national level. So these political party workers that I would meet in slums, they would occupy a distinct position in this hierarchy that would relate them to the other ones, once again, within their slum and outside of the slum. The BJP looks the exact same way. Their organizations are almost mirror images of one another. So the way, in my survey and the data that I was able to gather, I've actually been able to measure the density of political party networks across slums. So I went to the BJP, I went to the Congress, and I got extensive lists of all their members and the positions in their hierarchy. So I know across the 80 slums in my survey, how many party leaders are living in that slum, what is their position in the party, among other sorts of demographic information about them. And so quantitatively in my dissertation, I'm able to measure how many political party workers are there in each one of these slums per 1,000 people. So the density of these party ties in each distinct slum settlement. So to give you a sense of what the range of this variable is, in 16 of the 80 slums in my survey, there are no party workers. So you walk in, there's a complete absence of party workers in that slum community. The average slum settlement in my sample had about 2 party workers per 1,000 people. Not 2 party workers per 1,000 people. The max slum community had about 6 party representatives per 1,000 people. And in raw numbers, I think the largest number of party workers in a slum was about 120. But I'm dividing by population. Okay. So to just backtrack for a second, and to put slum settlements in context, in the case of India. So urban India has 400 million people in it right now, which is about 31% of the total population of India. And within the next 20 to 25 years, more people will be living in cities in India than in rural areas. A huge demographic shift, historically unprecedented. 93 million people live across about 50,000 distinct slums in India. So there's more individuals living in slums in India than the entire population of most European countries. So this is a huge chunk of humanity. About 23% of the urban population is living in slums, and this number is set to grow. So this is an increasing social, economic, and political problem in India right now, and it's only growing. So what are the distinct types of settlements that I'm studying? So if you pick up a book about slums anywhere in the world, one of the first things that they'll do is set out the different kinds of slums. So the urban poor living in different types of situations. In my dissertation, I'm specifically talking about urban settlement, squatter settlements, as they're called, which are usually defined as communities that are illegally established by migrants, or they're often called squatters. So they, a group of people typically coming from a rural area, setting up jugis or shacks on government land or private land, not land of their own, so it's illegal. These communities are usually devoid of formal state-led planning, and they're initially absent of formal property rights, so the people don't own the land. They can be kicked off whenever they want, or whenever the state decides to. And that the communities would have at least 50 households in it. So once again, these are typically referred to as squatter settlements, and this is the most common type of settlement in India and Asia more broadly. What I'm not discussing in my dissertation are things like rural villages that are absorbed into the municipal boundaries. So cities in India are growing exponentially, and the boundaries of the municipalities are growing as well, and they're incorporating things that were villages that have been around for hundreds of years. That's not what I'm studying. I'm also not discussing dilapidated areas in the old city centers. So I think many people here have been to Jaipur or in Bhopal, the old city centers. These are not squatter settlements. Those were artisans and laborers that were invited oftentimes by the princes or the royalty to work. They've been around for hundreds of years. They have formal property rights. This is a distinct historical kind of phenomenon. I'm also not discussing post-eviction resettlement colonies. So with all of these national development schemes in India to improve urban services and reduce urban poverty, some of these communities are being shifted into resettlement colonies where they're immediately provided development. That's also not something in my dissertation. Okay, so first, I'd like to get into my theory now. So what's causing this uneven spread of party networks across slums? Why are some political parties extending their networks into slums and not others? Before I get into that, though, I'd like to make an analytical point. So at least in political science, a common unit of analysis is the individual. So a lot of development economists and political scientists studying things with patron-client bargaining will often look at the individual or the individual politician and the bargaining between the two of them. In my dissertation, the main unit of analysis is the slum settlement. So slums are spatially defined and administratively named political units. They have distinct histories, they have distinct social networks within them, and they have developmental deficiencies that are unique to that settlement that politicians will use to bargain to get votes out of them. Politicians and political parties approach slums as communities, and they extend infrastructural development, social services, and these party networks I've been discussing based on community characteristics. So this is Shivpuri in Bhopal, and this is Bhojpura in Bhopal. They have names. The individuals living in these settlements identify with the settlements. There are distinct networks in there. When politicians come in, they approach them as a settlement. They meet the leaders there who are representing the residents in that slum. So this is this is my unit of analysis in my dissertation project. So I'd like to discuss the effect. One of the variables that I think strongly influences the spread of party networks and development in slums, and that is the size of the slum, or what politicians in urban India often call vote banks. So the first thing is that thinking like a politician in India, thinking like an MLA or a ward councillor, they're attracted to slums for the following reason. The marginal electoral returns of a unit of time or resources. So if you're a politician, that your money and your time is better spent trying to get votes out of slums than in middle class or wealthy colonies. It's less expensive for you to get votes out of slums than in these more wealthy colonies, because these are vulnerable populations who typically have low levels of development, and they're more easily bought off, essentially. Next, these political parties and these candidates, they have limited resources. They don't have an unlimited amount of money. And these ranked positions that I've been discussing are limited as well. If you're a higher party organizational member and you want to give a position of a ward president, in that larger ward there'll probably be 15 to 30 slums. You can only give the ward president position to one individual in that ward. So who you give it to tells you a lot about the incentives that are facing that politician. Next, slum settlements present increasing returns to scale as populations rise. So a unit of your time or your resources has larger network effects and reputational reverberations in larger settlements. So a unit of your time or your money or your resources in a larger slum will get you more votes than in a smaller slum. And that's because of these reputational reverberations. So during my ethnographic work, it'd be common for a politician to come in. The slum beforehand hadn't had a street. The politician will come in, there'll be all this ceremonial, he'll get the garlands. He breaks the ground, all of the people in the community come together, and afterwards everyone's sitting around drinking chai, talking about, oh, we finally got this road, we're gonna have to vote for this guy. The larger the slum is, the more these reputational reverberations spread throughout the slum. And so as a politician, your time and your money is better spent, your limited time and money is better spent in a larger slum. So given these incentives, larger slums are targeted by parties for this network expansion more than smaller slums. So smaller slums over time become politically marginalized. they're not as electorally important to politicians, and so they're kind of pushed to the wayside, both in terms of this party network expansion and, as I'll show you later, in terms of development. So to give you some quotes from some of the interviews that I did with some of the politicians. So an MLA in Bhopal said to me, "Adam, I live in a posh neighborhood here in Bhopal. Hardly 25 or 30% of people in my area will vote. We will not decide our representative. In slums, 90% of the people come out and vote. The kingmakers are those living in slums." Next, a BJP state representative. "Our main strategy is that those people who are more voters, we have to capture them. And then similarly, in a democracy where people are more and are more powerful, their work gets done faster." So this is kind of getting in the mind of these politicians, how they're thinking, looking out at their constituency board before an election and deciding how they're going to be allocating their resources. So I've been talking a lot about these top-down forces, parties deciding to do things. What's going on in the slums? What determines these demand-side factors or the supply of leadership? So in only 2 of the 80 slums that I sampled did I walk in and I found that there was no identifiable leader. That if you ask residents, everyone says, no, there's no Neta here, there's no Pradhan, there's no Sarpanch. We don't have a Neta here. And the pervasiveness of leadership in slums is for a simple reason, that these are contexts of high vulnerability and underdevelopment. And so these things compel individuals in those communities to take on leadership positions. And these individuals are typically a little bit better educated and a little bit more wealthy than their counterparts. And I actually had an experience with this. I came in one of my case studies, my case study communities in the morning, and a group of 60 or 70 residents the night before had decided that they wanted to make me their Neta. So they told me this in the morning. I would make a terrible leader, but it's because they saw me as having connections to the outside world, that I might be able to get things done for them because I'm meeting all these politicians. This is how this leadership kind of rises in these communities. And there's many incentives for engaging in netagiri, or leadership activities. First are the material incentives. You get a lot of money from political parties during elections. There's the residents, your followers in the slum, you're able to deliver them to the parties during elections. And the parties know this, and they're going to give you money for it. So I had leaders that would brag to me that they would get upwards to 30 to 35,000 rupees per election to do this. This is 6 times more money. This is 6 months worth of income for their counterparts in the slum. This is a considerable amount of money. They also get political protection and insulation from the police. They also get social prestige in the community. So the symbolism of being a Neta, a leader in the community, is incredibly important, kind of having that party symbol outside your house. This feeling of invincibility that you're connected to this party structure. And also these individuals live in the slum community. They also want schools for their children to go to. They also want clean drinking water. They want roads to walk on so that during the rainy season they don't have to walk through mud. So they want to improve their community for these reasons as well, which I wouldn't necessarily call altruism, but it's benefiting everybody. The point, once again, going back to size though, is that the incentives for leadership, the ability to get all these things and the amount that you can get is proportional to the size of your vote bank. So the larger the slum you're in, if you're engaged in leadership activities, the larger the potential following that you can build behind you, that you can ultimately deliver to a political party and get higher of these things. You can move higher in the party, get more money. So I've been talking a lot about size. To give you a sense of how big these slums are. In Jaipur, the average slum is just over 3,000 people. In Bhopal, a little bit smaller, 1,600 people, with a large standard deviation, so there's a lot of variability. The largest slum in Jaipur is about 24,000 people, and in Bhopal, about 16,000. I think this picture kind of demonstrates this a little bit even better than the numbers. So this is an area in southern Bhopal. This is one state electoral constituency. Each of these little purple blobs is a slum settlement. It has, as I said before, it has its own name. When the MLA in this area thinks about his constituency, he's aware of all these slums. He has networks spread throughout all these slums that he's able to tap during elections. So as you can see, they're really spread out. The size of them is quite random. You'll have large slums kind of scattered with smaller ones. And within this area, there's probably about 5, 6, or 7 wards. So the Bhopal Municipal Corporation, there'll be 5 to 7 wards in this area. But this is a state legislative assembly constituency. So one kind of interesting thing that I needed to think about before, especially I did my survey, was Well, wouldn't you think that slum settlements would become captured by one party? So the BJP would capture a slum, or the Congress would capture a slum, and then the other party would kind of ignore it, like that's a Congress slum. We have to avoid that one. We have to go to the other ones. And I was surprised to see after my survey that I asked survey respondents, think about the last several elections. Have you voted for the same party in all of these elections, or have you voted for different parties? So I think there's a common perception that a lot of these people would be party loyalists, that the Muslims, for instance, would always be voting for the Congress, or different types of SC, ST groups would always be going for the Congress. Over 30% of the respondents said that they've switched parties, which I think is actually a very high number. So given how competitive some of these elections are in municipalities, if you have a slum of 10,000 people and 3,000 of them are up for grabs, that can make or break the election for you. Only 10% of people said they don't vote, so voter turnout is also very high. And 60% of people do vote for the same party. But the point is that all of these slums are somewhat up for grabs. And considering the party leaders themselves, this is kind of a measure. If it's 1, it means all of the political party workers in that settlement belong to the same party. And if it's 2, there's a 50-50 split, that 50% of the leaders are from one party and 50% of the leaders from the other party. So the average across my sample slum suggests that in the average slum, it might have more party leaders from one party, but there's always the presence of these other leaders from the other parties. So there's some degree of kind of balance going on, that none of these communities are a pucka vote bank for the Congress or the BJP. They kind of float back and forth. And something else I found was interesting is almost 30% of the 102 Muslim party leaders in my 80 sample slums belong to the BJP. So even something that I think is stereotypically considered to be a vote bank of the Congress, the Muslim vote, you can see that even Muslim leaders are joining the BJP as well. The second theoretical topic I'd like to discuss before kind of getting into my findings is the effect of social heterogeneity, social diversity in the communities on party network expansion. So why slum settlements have very dense party networks and others don't. So slums in India are incredibly diverse places. And this really surprised scholars and policymakers in India when I would present it, because there's this common perception that these migrants are coming from small cluster villages. They're mostly homogenous. They're moving into the city, and they kind of create these homogenous enclaves. This is not the case at all. Considering caste diversity, religious diversity, the state of origin, so the region that the migrant's actually coming from, and the district of origin that the migrant's coming from, if you look down this column right here, this number represents the probability that 2 randomly selected people in a community are from a different group. So in terms of caste, the average slum in my sample, there's an 80% chance that if you randomly selected 2 people out of that community, they'd be a different caste. So highly diverse in terms of caste. District of origin, there's about a 70% chance that 2 randomly selected people out of my average slum would be from a different district in India. About a 30% chance in terms of the region of origin, and about a 15% chance in terms of religious diversity. So in the average slum settlement, there will typically be, if it's a majority Hindu, there will typically be some Muslims there. If it's majority Muslim, there'll typically be some Hindus there. And in Bhopal, what's also going into this number is the presence of Buddhists, self-proclaimed Buddhists. So I also asked, so not only are these communities incredibly diverse, but also within them, there's a real sprinkling of these groups. So I asked respondents in my survey, considering the households around you, the households adjacent to you, are all of the households around you of the same samaj as you? And that would depend on who you're talking to. So caste, the tribe, or maybe there's Zat. Only 38% of respondents said that was true. And even less, 14% said everyone around them, or the immediate people around their households, were from the same village as them. So not only, once again, are these communities diverse, but within them there's a lot of mixing and diversity. So what's causing this diversity? So kinship networks do facilitate the migration process. So if I'm living in a village in West Bengal and I want to move to Jaipur, what will normally happen is I have a cousin, I have a friend, I have a brother that's there that's going to help facilitate me getting a jugi, a house in the slum, and a job. So these kinship networks do facilitate migration for individuals and families. However, I can't shop around. There's a scarcity of urban land on which these typically poor rural migrants can squat. And usually that's on environmentally sensitive lands. So along a riverbed, or next to a mountain, or next to some other sort of hazardous zone, or along a highway. So there's a scarcity of land that you can squat on. Also, as I just mentioned, I have a preference to be in close proximity to work and these people that can help facilitate me getting a job and a house. So I'm constrained by these things. So what happens then is that migrants are forced to coexist with social groups that were unknown and unanticipated prior to migration. So if I'm coming from West Bengal into a slum in Jaipur or in Delhi, I'm going there and I know my brother's there, but I also don't know that some of that community has Punjabis in it, and some people from Tamil Nadu, and some Biharis. And we're in an incredibly densely populated area, and we're forced to coexist with one another. So I asked people in my survey, Jaipur or Bhopal are big cities with many slums. Why did you choose this specific settlement out of all the other settlements to make your home? So you see that a majority of people said that they wanted to join their family or the spouse's family. That there was land for available squatting in that community. That the slum was in close proximity to work, or they got work in the slum. Other things like wanting to be near their own samaj, their own caste or religious group. Very few respondents noted that. Also, what's interesting is very few respondents noted that they chose the slum based on levels of development. That's because they don't have the convenience of doing that. They need someone to help them when they get to the city, and they need to be close to where they work. They can't shop around and say, well, this slum has roads and this one doesn't, I better move here. There's a constraint over them. Okay, so one of the first things I would do in my ethnographic case studies is I'd walk into the communities and I'd speak to some of the older members of the community, people that had been there since the beginnings, people that had been there for 20, 30, 40 years, or some of the older leaders. And I'd ask them to describe, what was that early environment like when you first moved here? And what they described to me, I discuss my dissertation and call it pervasive uncertainty. So once again, going back to that example, I move into the slum community. I'm Bengali. I speak Bengali. There's a little Bengali community within the slum settlement, but there's these other people speaking different languages. They're doing different types of work. They belong to different types of castes. There's different religious groups. There's an uncertainty over behavioral norms and expectations. How are we going to interact with these people? Understandings of authority and mechanisms of sanctioning. So I might come in from my village and have an understanding of what a jati panchayat might be like. But that as an informal institution, these other groups have different understandings of what is legitimacy, what is informal leadership. And there's uncertainty over relative social status. Who are these people? What is the sense of hierarchy among these groups? The second condition of what I'm describing as pervasive uncertainty is an interdependence and shared risks and a common fate among these people. And that these are centripetal forces. So as I said, these are incredibly densely populated areas. If the community is going to be evicted, everyone needs to get together to stop it. If they want to get development, there needs to be some sort of cooperation among them. They're interdependent on one another. So pervasive uncertainty is not something that's uniform across slum settlements. It's variable, and it's a function of the social heterogeneity of that community. So a more socially diverse community in those early years, there's going to be more uncertainty over how we're supposed to interact with these other people. So what I noticed through my interviews and my ethnographic work was that there's an initial gravitation towards an intergroup form of authority and organization. So there's going to be Biharis and Rajasthanis. Maybe the Biharis are a little bit diverse in terms of caste, but they're all Bihari, they speak Bhojpuri, and a neta will kind of come up for the Bhojpuris, and there'll be a Rajasthani neta. If it's only caste diversity, that might be the social cleavage along which leadership develops. But what I see in my case studies, and I'll show you statistically a little bit later, is that ethnic heterogeneity causes an increase in the fragmentation of leaders in these communities. So the more socially diverse the community is, typically the more leaders you'll have within it. It's not a one-to-one mapping. If there's 20 caste groups, you're not going to get 20 leaders. But if there's 20 caste groups, you might get 5 leaders. And if there's 2 caste groups, you might get 1 leader. Also, ethnic heterogeneity increases the presence of multi-party networks. So because of party network crowding, if there's lots of leaders and, oh, this guy he's the president of the BJP at the ward level, I'm also a leader, I should go for Congress, because then I can get an equal position. Even if my party's not in power at the moment, at least I kind of get this prestige and I'm the ward president. So ethnic heterogeneity increases the presence of multi-party networks as well. So through these mechanisms of increasing leadership fragmentation and the presence of multi-party networks, I'm arguing, and what I think I've found is something that is counterintuitive in a larger body of literature in political science, sociology, and economics, which is that the more socially heterogeneous a community is, the lower levels of cooperation that you'll see, and the lower levels of public goods provision and development that you'll see. I'm finding the exact opposite, that the more socially heterogeneous a slum settlement is, the more fragmented the leadership will be. And then among all these leaders, a competition grows. That I may have emerged, if I'm a Rajput, I may have emerged within my Rajput group, but I'm seeking to spread my following to other groups in the community. And so the leaders within the slum settlement start to compete with one another over who can be kind of the top neta, because parties will identify this and you get more goodies by being kind of the top guy. So they're competing over this. This competition causes accountability among leaders in the community. That if I'm a regular resident, if I go to Jason and he starts, he's not doing a great job and he's asking for a lot of money, I'm going to go to someone else. And then Jason will lose his vote bank beneath him. He falls out of the party, and he loses all those things that I just described in the previous slide. And this ultimately leads to higher levels of development. And then lastly, in my theoretical section, so over time, as I said, larger slums and more socially heterogeneous slums become saturated with these party networks that I've been describing. And this causes a range of things. First of all, this causes differences in the strength of claim making. So if the water line breaks, or the electricity gets cut off, or the flood waters wash away the road. If I'm in a community with a lot of political party workers, there's an organizational apparatus in the slum connected all the way up to the politician, either at the municipal or state level, who will organize the people to do andolans, dharnas, rastarokos, these strike activities to get these levels of development. That I found in my ethnographic work that horizontal levels of collective action among regular residents is very rare and fleeting. It's these vertical ties that organize the residents to get these levels of development. And just to briefly mention, where are these development funds coming from? So ward councilors in India and state level representatives and national level representatives, they get these local area development funds. So at the local level, they'll get about the equivalent of about $30,000. At the state level, about $200,000, and even more at the national level. They're highly discretionary. They get to decide how it's spent, and then they send that along to a bureaucrat who will kind of get the work done then. But if they want something to get done, they can get it done. And I don't know if you can see this, but I just think this is an interesting illustrative example. So this is a development letter sent by a slum leader. It's on BJP letterhead. The MLA is from the BJP. This can go straight to the MLA, who can tell the bureaucrat to go put electricity lines or water or streetlights in the community. I'm sorry you can't see this very well. This is a letter from a very small slum community. It's not a party worker. Some of the little leaders, put their thumbprints on the bottom there. That's going to get lost in a stack of paperwork in the municipality, and nothing's going to get done. So just to give you some a couple more quotes, or actually, I'll describe to you this briefly in the data section. But one of the most fascinating types of data that I was able to gather is that slum leaders obsessively keep all the documentation over all the decades that the slum has been going on. So community meeting letters, letters they write to politicians and bureaucrats, rules of the slum and what the punishments would be. They keep these to show other residents in the community, look at everything I've done. And a lot of these communities are also kind of in legal disputes, so they're used as legal documents as well. But overwhelmingly, these leaders were willing to share these things with me. So I was able to collect over 3,000 of these primary documents that span a 50-year period. So this is one from 2006 from a small slum community in Jaipur named Chettanagri. So the leader writes to a politician at the municipality, "We poor Gonds and Singhiwals and many other poor people, we have to tolerate heat, cold, rain, and many other problems. We sell herbs, drive rickshaws, make swings, play drums, and make wooden trays. We've been staying here for the last 30 to 35 years. We, here for so many years, request the government for help. We do not get any attention and have been to offices many times, and as a result, it has all become a headache. Therefore, we request that Chettanagri should be rehabilitated, and wherever that is, we should get pattas. We poor people should always be obliged." I would often meet with this leader, Mr. Prabhudayal, And this quote kind of sums up his mood. I would ask him, you've been putting in all this work for the last 20 or 30 years to try to develop your community. Why do you think haven't been successful? And he quite simply states, our understanding level is low, our Janshakti, our population strength is low, and we're afraid. Oppositely, in one of the larger slum communities that I did my ethnographic work in, Jawaharnagar, and if those of you that have been in Jaipur, it's that huge slum along the Delhi Bypass Road. There's about 25,000 people in it. So this is from a newspaper, and this kind of represents the organizational power of this larger slum because of its party networks. Under the leadership of former Minister and BJP leader Kali Charan Saraf, Jawaharnagar slum dwellers organized a traffic jam at Jawaharnagar bypass to protest about various issues. They demanded repairing the damaged roads, immediate discontinuation of heavy vehicle movement on the road, and improved development work. The police officers tried to appease the BJP leaders who were organizing the traffic jam, but the hundreds of people who were jamming the traffic opened the roads only after the meeting was over. So whenever there's a problem in Jawaharnagar, these party networks are there to organize the community and to get these goods for themselves. Just quickly before I go into my results, so my work was done in Jaipur and Bhopal. I thought they'd be great comparisons. They're both considered tier 2 cities in India. So Jaipur is about 3 million people and Bhopal is 1.8 million people. They're both capitals of Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh. They're both recipients of Jain and URM and Rajiv Avas Yojana, these large central slum development schemes. So the same sort of policy things are going on in them. They're both former princely states. They have similar ratio between local representatives and their population. And about 20 to 25% of their populations are in slum settlements. So I thought these would be appropriate kind of comparisons, and then to choose slums within them. So I then spent about 15 months doing ethnographic work in 8 slum settlements in Jaipur and Bhopal. And I chose these settlements very deliberately because I wanted to choose slums that started at the same time, that were in as much similar conditions as possible, so I could trace historically their divergences over time in the way that they organize and have gotten development. So some of the things that I made sure were kind of constant across those slums was the land ownership category, the state assembly constituency, the age of the settlement, so they all kind of popped up around 1980, access to common local labor markets, so they're very, very close together in the same area of Jaipur, and per capita income levels. As I described to you, my sense of the historical development of leadership largely arises through these primary documents that I was able to collect that these slum leaders have kind of obsessively kept. So once again, correspondence with politicians and officials, these development council meeting notes, election materials, lists of informal community rules and how they would be punished, account books, and leadership rosters. I then went in with a team of researchers across these 80 slums. And with high-resolution satellite images, we essentially walked around in groups, and we found out where are all the streetlights. And so this is one slum, this is another slum. Where are all the streetlights? Are they working or are they broken? Where are all the paved roads? Where are the roads that are kacha or not paved? Where are the main water lines? Where are the mandirs? Where are the masjids? All these different types of developmental things that I'm trying to study. We measured them this way, so I can tell you quite accurately what percentage of paved roads there are in this slum, or how many streetlights per capita there are, and how many of those are working. And also in the survey, we asked people about access to various public goods and services. So is your municipal trash collected? Do you have a ration card? Do you have a voter ID card? These sorts of things. These party organizational networks that I described to you before, the parties were able to provide me with party organizational rosters, so who are all these people in these networks. And then lastly, this past summer, I did a survey across almost 2,000 households in 80 spatially distinct slums in Jaipur and Bhopal. The survey asked about 200 questions measuring things like social capital, inter-household conflict and violence, history of collective action and protest, property rights and land ownership, different sorts of various social and economic indicators at the household level, and then migratory preferences. And that's the survey team in Bhopal. I'll go through this quickly because then I'm more interested in your questions, but just to kind of show you statistically what I'm finding is that every 1,000 people you add to the population of a slum statistically would be associated with increasing the level of party workers per 1,000 people by 0.15. So every 6,000 people you might add to a slum is associated with adding an additional party worker per 1,000 people. So statistically, I think I have evidence that the larger the slum, as I asserted before, the more likely it is that these dense party networks will be coming into it. Also, the more religiously diverse and the more diverse the regions of origin the migrants are coming from, the more likely there is to have these dense party networks in them. I'll just skip to this. In trying to explain levels of development, so considering street coverage, or the number of streetlights per 1,000 people, access to trash collection, this variable that I'm calling community political saturation, the number of political party workers per 1,000 people, is statistically strong in explaining these different things. So adding one party worker per 1,000 people is associated with adding about 8% more paved roads. Adding an additional party worker per 1,000 people is associated with adding about one more streetlight per 1,000 people. Same with trash collection and access to doctor camps. Two things that the variable does not explain well is the percentage of people that have access to sewer lines and the access to piped water. What does is whether or not the slum settlement is on central land. So slums are situated on different types of land in India: municipal, private, state land, central land. If you're a slum on central land, you're bound by central government rules more, and local politicians have a more difficult time circumventing these laws to deliver development to the community. I think I'll stop there and take questions.